Awesome. Okay. Well,
Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Emerson Murray, and he just wrote a really fascinating book. I loved reading through it. I'm from Northern California. I know the area that he writes about. The title of his book is Murder Capital of the World. The Santa Cruz community looks back at the John Linley Frazier, Herbert Mullin, and Edmund Kemper murder sprees of the early 1970s. It has 12 5-star ratings right now on Amazon. And this is Emerson Murray's second book. His first book was titled Bruiser Brody, and it's a primary source biography published by Crowbar Press. Emerson has written articles, he paints and makes cassettes and CDs. He grew up in the San Lorenzo Valley and still lives in Santa Cruz County, where a lot of this takes place, with his wife, 2 kids, and 2 dogs. You can visit his website, which is his full name, emersonmurray.com. And another one for this book is the title of the book, which is Murder Capital of the World Altogether.com. You can listen about this very fascinating, very well-written book. So Emerson Murray, welcome to the show. Thanks for agreeing to the interview.
yeah, thank you very much, William, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Can you kind of talk about your background? I know the locale is very important to this book, where you are and your father, and then what led you to put together this really fascinating book, Murder Capital of the World.
Yeah, so as some of your guests may know or may not know, Santa Cruz, California, in the early 1970s, we sort of experienced or lived through the horror of having John Linley Frazier, a mass murderer, commit a horrible series of crimes here, and as well as having 2 serial killers, Edmund Kemper and Herbert Mullin, basically have our community as hunting grounds. And I was born in 1973. My parents were in the area. I was born in the area in Santa Cruz, in the San Lorenzo Valley. My dad knew one of the victims of Herbert Mullin. It was he was killed. A man named Jim Genera. Jim was murdered before I was born, just 2 months before I was born. And so it was something in my life, and I think many people in Santa Cruz, my age, just growing up sort of in the shadow of this tragedy, this series of tragedies in our community. So, I mean, there's the impacts of these crimes really are still being felt today. Herbert Mullin killed 13 people. He thought that he was going to save California from a cataclysmic earthquake. Obviously, he had mental health conditions, and he thought that sort of the Aztecs had it right, and that by human sacrifice he could prevent natural disasters. And the way he phrased it was, you'd have a smaller disaster, murder. It would prevent a larger natural disaster. And Edmund Kemper, at that time, he was murdering co-eds, college students, and high school student at that time, and he killed them, and then ultimately killed his mother and one of her friends, and then turned himself in. And then, as I said earlier, John Linley Frazier, before Kemper and Mullin in 1970, killed a local eye surgeon, a very prominent eye surgeon named Dr. Victor Oda, and his family, and one of his employees/friends named Dorothy Cadwallader. So that's sort of the background of the book. For me personally, like I said, we sort of grew up in the shadow of this. We always knew the name Herbert Mullin. It was, my dad always had a picture on the wall. I've said this before, and it's in the book, of himself and Jim hiking, and they were buddies together. They lived in a commune together, sort of the hippie lifestyle there. And so we just knew what had happened. It was never explained to us. I can't remember when I first heard the name Herbert Mullin. It was just always there, sort of in our life. And I can remember my brother and our neighbors out under the streetlight talking about Herbert Mullin, at a very young age in elementary school. We logically knew that he was in prison, but we would still make up stories. He was like our boogeyman. He scared the heck out of us, and was, we'd make up other horrible stories and things like that. And similar with Frazier and Kemper, those names were always around, and they're still around. I mean, some of the younger people may not know the names, but I could go like into Nob Hill or Safeway or in a grocery store and just say the names, and people will start talking about it. And people have recognized me and mentioned something, and then other people join in, or it's just it's everywhere. Everybody here seemingly has some sort of connection to these crimes. They were just so big, and so many murders in our small community.
They were horrible crimes too, like the worst of the worst family murders. And can you kind of talk about Santa Cruz at that time in that area and kind of the social movement? You talk about the difference between the short hairs and the long hairs, but I think the drug culture and a lot of that's a very important background for how these crimes took place.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, Santa Cruz had been a retirement community for many, many years. It was sort of a laid back, and it still sort of has that reputation, just this laid back kind of surfer community. At that time, the population was older. And then in the late or in the mid 1960s, UC Santa Cruz, the university, opened up in Santa Cruz, and that brought in a flood of young people and just a new sort of face, an overlay on Santa Cruz, new culture brought in. At the same time, there were some changes in welfare laws where you didn't necessarily need to live where you were getting your welfare check. So a lot of hippies and, like you said, long hairs started coming into Santa Cruz. The drug culture was changing things and was opening up things. Youth culture, women's movements were happening. With the university, all of those things sort of came together. So, I mean, Santa Cruz was sort of a tense place at that time. Even before these murders occurred in the late 1960s, where these different cultures were hitting it, were up against each other. Um, they actually had a report done, the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors, to say, hey, we have this problem. They called it the Utes. That's an acronym for undesirable transient elements, is what they called them. And they were saying, we have this homeless or whatever, these transient people here. Who are they? Find out. They had a study done, and the study came back with a couple of interesting findings. One is that Santa Cruz was unique in California, where they had this really large population of older and elderly people and this really large population of youth, and not so much in the middle. And that was part of the reason for these tensions. The other thing they came back, and the Board of Supervisors wasn't happy about this, but they came out with this, the finding that, well, all these hippies and these long hairs, most of them are your kids. They're locals. they're your kids are of you. So, and they're the ones that are just dealing pot and smoking pot and some LSD. The ones that are doing the hard drugs, they look more like the Board of Supervisors in suits and ties and things like that. So it didn't go over very well, and I think it got swept under the rug a little bit. But it just goes to show, the pressure here was immense. And when these murders started, especially the John Linley Frazier crimes, because he sort of identified as a hippie. The hippie community was not supportive of him, really, but he identified as a hippie, and his ideas, he had mental health issues as well, but he had sort of these ideas that he was going to rally, the Oda family, by building this they had this beautiful home up on the hill near where he lived, that they were destroying nature, and he was going to have them destroy their own house, and then they were going to caravan to the next, large house or mansion or whatever, and then that owner would burn his own house, and then they would caravan on. He just had these wild ideas, and it didn't pan out that way. Dr. Oda, fought for his family and fought for his life, and they all, they paid because of
He
this
was
bad.
like he really carried out some kind of ecological attack, thinking that he
Yeah.
was going to. He had some kind of weird idea, but that's drugs. I think he was taking one of them was taking mescaline, a lot of mescaline too, right?
Yeah,
Some
both
kind of
both
thing.
he and Mullin, yeah, were very into drugs and LSD, and yeah, he did do mescaline. There were stories of him. He had been talking for a while about this revolution, and they were going to get the pigs and the rednecks, and we use those terms a little differently now today, but that's what he called sort of these wealthy people, um, and they were going to pay for what they had done to the environment. I mean, the sick part of it is the Odas, they constructed that house with a prominent architect named Aaron Green, that worked with them to not cut down any trees, to build the house around the natural environment. I mean, it's just a beautiful home. I've been up there, and and that was, he couldn't even recognize that. He was so deluded. So yeah, but drugs played a really, really large part in it for him, and as well for Herbert Mullin. He
And
lived. Oh, go
I
ahead.
got the sense like that era too. These words
Yeah,
pig and the bad guy. But the
yeah,
Otis didn't quite fit into it. They were kind of a multiracial. He was a self-made man, eye
yeah,
surgeon. So
yeah.
the ideation behind it just didn't really apply to that guy and his family, in my opinion.
Right, and maybe from a distance, Frazier's looking through binoculars at this house, and Dr. Oda, I talked to his daughter Lark Oda, and she survived. She was not living at the house at the time that mass murder took place. Frazier he killed Dr. Oda, he killed Dr. Oda's wife and their two sons, their two young sons, as well as, like I said before, his secretary, Dorothy Cadwallader. But they had two daughters who were not living at home at the time. And I've talked to Lark Oda since then. And she said that it her father was starting to get sort of audacious, and he was that was the word she used for the cars that he would drive. He started to buy these sports cars that were audacious because he was proud. Like you said, he was a self-made man. He learned to be a surgeon in the military, um, uh, and but his timing was sort of off, is how she phrased it, where he felt, I had worked from the ground up. I had worked from nothing to get this lifestyle, and I'm, going to live it. I'm going to enjoy it. Well, at the time, like you said, they were using the word pig. It was being used, and the society had sort of shifted, and he became the man, and that was not a good thing anymore to be a self-made, wealthy man. It just, yeah, he was not in tune, I guess, culturally with society, especially in Santa Cruz, where that just wasn't, I imagine, was not seen as a great thing at the end of the 60s.
And I don't know what the population is now, but I think back then it really had much more of a rural feel in the 70s. Right now, it's like super expensive, like
Yeah.
everything else in Northern Cal, but I think it was still kind of affordable and just a much difference. Like it really had kind of a beach town kind of.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It was. And everything, the university was very cheap. It was just a cheap town. And then, there's pockets in the San Lorenzo Valley where I'm from and where Mullin is from. Um, it's very rural. You're out in the woods. Peter Chang, who was the district attorney at that time, and he tried all three of those cases. He has a great quote in the book where he says, Santa Cruz is sort of unique in that you can be in a downtown environment surrounded by people, and in 3 to 5 minutes, you can be in the middle of a forest and no one can hear you, no one's around. So it was one of the reasons that he felt was these types of crimes were being committed at that time. It was just something he was speculating on.
And that's where you got the title of the book, right? Is from this character, Peter
Yeah,
Chang.
yeah, Peter Chang. Yeah. So after Herbert Mullin had killed these four boys that were camping illegally in Henry Cal Park, or near Henry Cal Park State Park, out in the forest, Mullin had been camping himself near there and been caught and arrested. And a couple months later, he found these boys out there camping, and he went and talked to them and said, "You're not allowed to camp out here." And he was just jealous. And he went back again. He murdered the four boys. Well, the next day, Peter Chang had a press conference, and a reporter from the San Francisco Examiner said, "Well, Mr. Chang, it sure looks like Santa Cruz is the murder capital of the world." And Peter Chang said something like, "Yeah, I suppose we are the murder capital of the world right now." And that name just stuck. It's always stuck. Our county supervisor, Pat Lickey, at the time, he couldn't stand it, and there's records in speeches where he's saying, "Oh, who came up with this stupid name and this terrible thing?" And they were afraid it was going to kill tourism, and we would depend on that with the boardwalk and everything. So it but it stuck, and it still sticks. And I had no doubt that's what I was going to name the book, and I was shocked that that title had not been used before. So yeah.
It's interesting. Can you talk about Peter Chang? Because he's an interesting character in this whole story too. He's a
Yeah.
unique person.
Yeah, Peter Chang is wild. He really interests me. I thought, gosh, if we could ever get a movie made from this book, he would be a great central character. So he was Korean. He was the first Korean district attorney in the United States. His father was like a submarine captain in World War II for the with the United States and the United States Navy. Um, he came from near Monterey County. He was a assistant district attorney over there. He came over here and was real tough on crime, and he ran against a man named Richard Pease who had some troubles. He won in a landslide. Um, Everyone that I talked to, everyone that I interviewed, eventually came around and mentioned Peter Chang's drinking. So and he mentioned it himself in articles and interviews, that it had really damaged his life, and he lost his family and his practice because of it. But even you know before he lost all that, while he was district attorney, he drank an awful lot, and that's sort of something he was known for. Um, but in the courtroom, brilliant by all accounts, an absolutely brilliant, aggressive person, open outside the courtroom. I talked to the investigator Harold Cartwright, who was an investigator with the public defender's office at that time. And he said, "Oh yeah, you could walk into Peter's office and they would share files with you, and they would talk to you about cases beforehand. But once you got in the courtroom, it was all bets were off." So just
He came from a legitimate background. He had a Stanford degree, so
hmm
I think he lived in Atherton. So
Atherton,
kind of a
yeah,
really
yeah, yeah,
remarkable guy. Yeah,
yeah, really neat. Uh, yeah,
but a hard drinker. I think I followed the rest of his story. So he was working while drinking during all this stuff. I'm sure the
yeah,
stress was off the charts, and then he was one of the types who would wait for the bar to open at 7 a.m. in the
right,
morning. So
right,
he was a day
exactly.
drinker. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's a
yeah,
shame, man.
exactly. He would work at night, and they had built a new county. They call it the county building here, and it's really the county sort of government building. And he would work at night, and people used to say that they could see the one light on in the window. He had a corner office over there, and strangely enough, right across the street from the county building is a bar called the Jury Room, and the Jury Room was sort of was known as a where the law enforcement, off-duty police officers and deputies would go and unwind. But in their midst, they didn't know it at the time, and this is sort of a known story. Edmund Kemper, the serial killer, was also drinking at that bar. It was a bar that he hung out at. I actually found an interview, which I don't think had been seen before or read before, uh, where Edmund Kemper talked about he had a rifle with a scope, and he would have it in the trunk of his car, and he'd park at the Jury Room, and he could see Peter Chang over there working, and he thought about lining up his sight and taking a shot at Peter Chang. I mean, he would never do something like that, but he said he thought about it.
Kemper was a drinker too. So you
Yeah,
mentioned that in your book. Like he
yeah,
was
yeah.
blitzed all the time, like
It's
always
sort of a
contact.
yeah, it's sort of a triangle. There's a gas station kitty corner, and he worked at the gas station, and he'd come over to the bar, and Peter Chang worked across the street. He'd come over to the bar, and it was just it's such a small community. I have to say that I've sort of it sounds strange, but I've sort of haunted myself now after writing this book. I
There's
drive around with my wife and my kids, and I'm saying, "Oh, there's where Kemper met his friend after he killed his mom. Oh, there's where," and it's sort of weird.
but,
It's just put this filter over the whole
but that was something that distinguished Kemper is that before he got caught or turned himself in, right? He injected himself kind of into the cop talk, right?
Yeah, into the investigation. He said he called himself sort of a friendly nuisance. And it took me a while, a couple of interviews before I got one of the deputy sheriffs to say, "Oh, yes, I actually did drink with Kemper and I hung out with Kemper. I didn't know him." And yes, he was a friendly nuisance, but I sort of liked him because I could beat him at arm wrestling. So, and Kemper's 6'9", so, it's sort of funny.
It's amazing. I mean, there's all kinds of amazing stories in this book that I didn't know. Like Kemper ends up with Mullin in jail, shipped
hmm
to Redwood City or whatever.
hmm
I don't know why did they feel like they had to. Was there not the facilities in Santa Cruz to keep those guys? I didn't understand why they shipped them to the Bay Area.
Yeah, and I heard it's so my book is a book told in quotes. It's I call it like a first person history. And so I can tell the story of why they were shipped over there, and you hear different people's points of view. The prosecution would say that, oh, we'll take Kemper as an example. Kemper was shipped over there because he tried to commit suicide twice in the cell, in his cell in Santa Cruz, and he was bleeding everywhere. And so they thought, oh, that'll be safer over there. Well, he tried to kill himself, I think, in Redwood City too. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 times, but um, well, you talk to the defense attorneys, and the defense attorneys are, the public defender's office. They're saying no. They want to ship them over there because in the visiting room, uh, they're wired up to record sound. And in the Frazier trial, they had recorded Frazier talking to his friends. So he's over here telling one story, and then they record him in the cell or in the visiting room at the jail talking to his friends, and it was admitted into court, which to everyone's surprise. So the defense is saying, yeah, all of the big hitters are going to, big crimes are going to end up in Redwood City because they can record in the visiting room. So it depends on who you believe. There's a variety of stories of why they were moved
Interesting.
over there.
But
Yeah.
it is interesting. They put
That
Mullin and Kemper right next to each other in the jail
is-
cell, and Kemper's teasing him and being a jerk. Like he seems to have that kind
Yeah.
of personality. Or
trying to manipulate, Mullin with
Yeah.
peanuts and all this stuff. And Mullin is over here singing and annoying everyone and all that stuff.
Acting psychotic.
I asked Mullin about that because I've been in contact with him, writing letters back and forth. I just send him a series of questions. He answers, and then he asks me questions about what's going on in Santa Cruz now. And I thought, I made it clear, like, we're not friends, but hey, I'll answer any questions you have about Santa Cruz if you answer my questions. So he's done that. And I asked him about that. I said, I hear all these stories about you singing and being, really annoying while you were in the jail, and Kemper manipulating you. And he said, whoever told you those stories is exaggerating. They're just trying to get publicity. And I didn't tell him that it was Kemper himself that told those stories. So it's sort of interesting, it's all.
But it is interesting, like in your communication with Mullin, he seems to have become less crazy. Do you get that sensibility in being in jail?
That's very interesting that you say that. He contends that yes, he had schizophrenia, differentiated. I can't remember exactly what he says. Differentiated paranoid schizophrenia, something like that. He says that he cured himself and that he's fine now. But at his last parole hearing, which was just last year, I think it was, the findings of the analysts that reviewed him said that he is actually worse now than he was before, because he believes these delusions that his family is somehow responsible for the murders, for forcing him to commit the murders. Even strong, his feelings are even stronger now than they were back then. And because he's believed these feelings so long, they determine that he's more of a danger now than even before. So I don't, whatever those find, I'm sure they're loaded with, things that I don't even understand, but that was what they said at the parole hearing. So it was interesting that you would ask that, because by his accounts, most certainly, I'm fine. I've cured myself and I'm ready. And he wants to come out and start over and move right back into San Lorenzo Valley and pick up where he started, and perhaps have an offspring or something. I forgot how he phrased it, but
wow, that's amazing. Yeah. He comes across in those writings in your interview very, very lucid. So it's the mind is really crazy things. And he killed those families at a camping trip by the mystery spot, which I think is still there, right? It's still up in the hills.
The mystery spot is still here. Yep. We went up not that long ago. Every once in a while, when we have a visitor from out of town, we bring them up there, and it's sort of a weird spot. There's a gate there, so you can't get up to that community that lives beyond the mystery spot. But yeah, that was the Francis family, and that was another thing. When we were kids, we would, Kemper killed co-eds, and when we were little, my brother and I, we most certainly were not college age women, so we were safe. But the thing about Mullin is he killed men, he killed women, he killed children. He even killed a priest over in Los Gatos, right outside his own confessional. It was random, and you just didn't know. And he killed in different styles. He actually, his second victim, he killed very similar. He picked up a hitchhiker and stabbed her, uh, and then dismembered her body in a very similar way to the way that Kemper killed. So, um, yeah, Mullin was just
That's
all
really
over the
crazy.
map. It was all in his head for very different reasons. It's not um, sort of how you think of, serial killers, and it's
Like
just a
they have
very
a certain
crazy thing.
target or rationale.
Yeah,
He was just a, yeah, just a
like a loose
killer.
cannon.
That's all.
Yeah, yeah, just a
Yeah.
killer. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. And what jail is he in now?
He's in. Oh gosh, you just asked me that. I was
Oh.
just there. I went and visited him not that long ago.
But Kemper's what? Kemper got transferred to like Oregon or something,
No,
right?
Kemper's still in Vacaville. He's been
Oh,
in
okay.
Vacaville,
Okay.
yeah, for years and years and years. Mule Creek, that's where Mullin is. And strangely enough, Frazier was in Folsom for many, many years, and then he was
Oh,
transferred over to Mule Creek. And I actually asked Mullin if he had run into Frazier, and I don't think I've ever told anyone this yet. Uh, and he said that he talked to Frazier a couple of times. Frazier used to play frisbee with some other guy, and he would, while he's playing frisbee, sort of walk over while he's still playing and talk to Mullin. And he did not know that Frazier was Frazier. He didn't know that
oh,
he was also from Santa Cruz, and the killer of. He thought he had killed a dentist, but instead of an eye surgeon, he got it wrong. But um, until after Frazier committed suicide, which was not like 2009 or 2014. Um, yeah, Frazier committed suicide.
yeah, very. I mean, the whole thing is. I mean, the psychosphere of Santa Cruz at that time
Yeah,
must have
that's a
been
good
off the
word.
charts because they didn't know some of those people who were doing it, right? At least Kemper for a while, so they
Oh,
didn't
for a
know
long
that.
time,
Yeah.
yeah, and they even investigated. They thought that perhaps this could be one killer,
Oh, I
and
didn't
a
know
lot
that.
of the public thought it was one killer, and there was pressure on Peter Chang after Herbert Mullin was caught to say, "Hey, that's over. We're done here. Everything's fine." There was a reporter in San Francisco. I forgot her name. She hosted a show on KQED on Saturdays, I think, and she was really pressuring Peter Chang, like, "Hey, you're done. Why don't you let people off the hook? And let them know that everyone's safe and it's okay." He wouldn't do it, and he was greatly justified in the long run. After Kemper turns himself in April of '73, um, but there was pressure there for sure, because some people thought there was one person
Right.
committing all these crimes.
And Kemper's confessions are off the chart. Like he was,
Yeah.
the thing is, his IQ was so high, the different than other killers,
Mhm.
where his self analysis was
Yeah.
sophisticated but super disturbing. Like he was just,
Yeah.
he
And
was,
he's very articulate. He's very he reads people real well, so he's super friendly. He knows how to read you real well. He, when he was 15 years old, most of your audience probably knows this, but he killed his grandparents, and he was sent away to a Atascadero mental hospital. Of course, he's a huge kid. He looks like an adult, but he's in this hospital with rapists and all these sophisticated sort of criminals, if that's what you want, if that's a word you want to use. But um, and he always said, what he learned there was, if you're going to rape someone, you got to kill him, because the Atascadero is full of rapists that got caught because they let people live. And so while he's in the Tascadero, they test his IQ. He always thought he was dumb, and he ends up with a 131, I think is what it was. There's an image in the book somewhere. I think it's actually in the index where it shows his first IQ test there. And he ends up with a 131, and of course it gets higher than that even. And so he was surprised as anyone to realize, wow, I'm actually smart. I had considered myself dumb all these years. But he started picking up there, and he started working in sort of the testing area where they would administer tests. And by his own accounts, he said that he had memorized the tests. He told his sister that. His sister, in an interview, said that he said that he had memorized the test. Later in a parole hearing, he said, "Of course, I didn't memorize the tests, but who knows that?" But then that's the nature of the book. You hear these different stories, and especially with Kemper, you know, the, for me, the great value of telling it as a first person is that you get to hear people talking in their circumstances. What you got to look at what they have to gain, what they have to lose. So Kemper, you can see Kemper's story change over years depending on a circumstance. So when he's first caught out and he turns himself in, and not caught, I should say, he turns himself in Pueblo, Colorado. Guys from Santa Cruz fly out there. They interview him, and I always felt like those interviews are probably his most candid interviews. Well, they drive back, which is a story in and of itself. This drive back to
Right.
Santa Cruz,
Right. And why they did it, right? I mean,
why they did
that's
it.
really
Right,
interesting. Yeah.
they're interviewing him the whole way, writing down things. Public defender said they had a tape recorder in the trunk, and the guys that were on the trip said, "Emerson, we didn't have a tape recorder in the trunk." But and they're also saying we couldn't get him to shut up when he was driving us up the wall. But they get him back to Santa Cruz. Then he's introduced to his public defender, Jim Jackson, and they start talking about an insanity defense. Well, then Kemper's story changes even more, and suddenly now he's a cannibal, and other things start coming out. And then years later, when he starts having his parole hearings, then his stories start changing again. So to me, the value of the book is you present all three stories, and the audience needs to determine, knowing what year is it, what's going on in society, what does Kemper have to lose or gain, what is going on with him, who's around him, what's he being influenced by, and here's each of those stories. Because really, and I have a problem with some nonfiction where, especially something like this, where Kemper's alone with a victim in his room. Nobody's there. The only, maybe there's some CSI evidence that we could draw conclusions from or something, but he's the only one that can tell us the story. And if you're not going to quote him and you're just going to say what happened, then you're taking this authoritarian sort of point of view, which is fine for most authors and that's fine for most books. That's great. But for me, I had some trouble with it because I knew the source wasn't always reliable. And so I felt like, you know, this really needs to come straight from the lips. It really needs to come. It's not me saying this happened, this happened, this happened.
Right.
It,
This,
let's hear from them.
the style of your book is outstanding. I really found it fascinating to read in that style. And you had all these first person accounts of all these people. You had Chang, Comstock, some of these
Yeah.
other policemen, your dad, as a matter of fact.
Mhm.
I mean, so I think that just the impressions of what people saw during that time, the way you related it, made it a real
Oh,
page turner for me.
yeah. Oh,
So,
neat. That's great to hear. Thank you. Yeah, I did. It was a lot of research, a lot of investigation, a lot of digging and digging. I started with the internet, and as soon as I started seeing discrepancies, I was like, "Oh, I'm going to get in trouble here. I really need to start making phone calls and talking because, I learned from my first book, Bruiser Brody. I went to Wikipedia when I started. Well, I don't even remember if Wikipedia was around at that time, but I went to Wikipedia and there all this information was incorrect, and I thought, God, nobody's editing, and this
the
information is
editors are
incorrect.
terrible on Wikipedia.
Right, and,
It's
and
not reliable. It might have used to been, but it's not anymore.
and we're feeding ourselves, because people are using that as a source, so it's just constantly getting fed. And my big example of that is every documentary you ever see about Herbert Mullin, they say, oh, he was voted most likely to succeed in his as San Lorenzo Valley class of 1965. And I went to SLV, so I went and I looked at those yearbooks when I was in high school, and I said, oh, I'm going to go look up this guy that killed my dad's friend. I want to see what he looked like, because we didn't have the internet. And there it is. There's Herbert Mullin and the thing, and all these articles saying most likely to succeed. Well, you turn the page, and it sure isn't Herbert Mullin. I don't know what that guy that was voted most likely to succeed feels, but it wasn't Herbert Mullin. So I don't know how that story got picked up, but we feed each other. I mean, it just becomes into the cycle of misinformation. And that is disturbing. And for me, especially when a story like this, which is 50 years old now, the folks are passing away and the memories are disappearing, and we're losing our first person um, people, our sources are disappearing, and they're going to be pretty much all gone in 20 years. So I felt like we need to capture this now because the accuracy is only going to get worse. So I felt like it was sort of a last ditch. People ask me, how long do you work on this book? I say, oh, I worked on it for 30 years. I've been collecting things, but really in earnest, I worked on it for about 2 years. But I already had boxes of newspapers and my dad and all these stories and, dinners in third grade with my friend Steve Schwunderlop, the hearing stories from his parents. And it was just something that was just such a part of me that I don't know. It didn't feel hard. That may sound strange.
Did you have like any? I mean, you had a lot of interviews with people, 2020 ex-cops, prosecutors. Mm-hmm. Did they seem to really want to share the story? Did you find that to be the case?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. So, very mixed bag. Very mixed bags. Law enforcement much more into it. They were open to talking about it. A lot of them sort of had been telling the same stories. So I needed to find a way to sort of ask different, like, what kind of shoes was he wearing? So that they're not working from the part of the brain that's telling a story and they're actually remembering. So once I kind of would get folks going, I could get some new, fresh information and remind them, hey, well, in the court, it said something, testimony, it said something a little different. Oh, yeah, that's right. It was like that. So we got a lot of new, interesting information that way. Now, with the families and friends of the victims, again, real up and down. In those cases, I wrote letters first. I felt like a phone call would be a little bit of an ambush. So would write letters and let them respond to me if they wanted to. And in some cases, it was, how dare you bring this up? And this is terrible. And I get it. I can't completely, I'm not with you. I haven't had that experience, but I can empathize. That's fine. And in other cases, it's a story I tell quite a bit, is they're excited to talk. They say, we see these documentaries and these documentaries and articles and books about the killers, and nobody's asking us about our family member. Nobody's asking us about Mary. Mary Guilfoyle's family said that to me, who was Mullin's second victim. Nobody's ever asked us about Mary, and they sent pictures, and now we have a story. Before, there was really only one or two pictures of Mary Guilfoyle online or anything. Nobody knew anything about her, and now we have these stories because she was a real person, and for me, that was like, that was the best part of the experience, because it's a nightmare slogging through Kemper's description of his crime. That's horrible. But when these the families of these victims are saying, oh my God, my family member is no longer a number or a statistic, they're a real fleshed out person, because a lot of them had very short lives. They died young and they didn't have this rich, full experience of a full life. But many of them had very interesting lives. So I felt very honored about that. I'm very touched about that. That was the best part of the book.
Yeah, you talk about a lot of the victims as like full real humans. So I credit you.
I tried to get every single one of them. There's only one that and unfortunately it was Jim's wife, Joan Genera, that I just don't have a good picture of. She's in the very last page of the book, but I could not get a good picture of her. And
well, it's supremely well researched. It's a great read. I like the structure of it. Very unique. It's very different in the best way possible from other true crime books. Where's the best place for people to get this book, Emerson?
Well, I'm down to 40 copies, you guys. So murdercapitaloftheworld.com. Go there, order the book there. I had it in some local bookstores, but I'm telling them that I'm sold out at this point. I'm only limiting it to 1 copy per household. It's going to sell out fast because things are happening. I'll get a second printing out there eventually. That's going to take some time. Murder Capital of the World. And if you have trouble with the website, feel free to communicate with me. I'm open. I'm a person, me and my kids. I got 2 teenage daughters, and we wrap them up and get them shipped out, as soon as we can. We're doing all the business end of it ourselves. I had a pallet of books delivered to my garage, so it's all self-done.
Nice. And that's emersonmurray.com is another.
Oh yeah, Emerson Murray is my website. Yeah, right. You can look at my weird paintings. Yeah.
And people, if they want to contact you, they can contact you through emersonmurray.com.
Yep. Or
Okay, cool.
murdercapitaloftheworld.com. Yeah, whatever
Awesome.
works for you.
Well, great job. Excellent book. Really one of the better true crime books. I read a lot of them. This is definitely in the top tier
Thank you
for
very
sure.
much.
So congratulations. Really well done. Super, just great research. Again, the author's name is Emerson Murray, and the title of the book, Murder Capital of the World, the Santa Cruz Community, looks back at the John Linley, Frazier, Herbert Mullin, and Edmund Kemper murder sprees of the early 1970s. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, take care. Stay there.